What if I told you, in ancient times cats weren't just pets. Some believed they were connected to dark spiritual forces. In the world of the Bible, people feared unseen powers, spirits, and hidden influences. But strangely, cats appear in the background of ancient cultures, especially in places like Egypt, often linked to mystery, protection, and sometimes something far darker. Before we go deeper, make sure you subscribe for more hidden Bible mysteries. And drop a comment. What do you think about cats? So, what did people really believe about cats during biblical times? And could there be a hidden spiritual meaning we've completely overlooked? Long before electricity banished the dark, before science gave names to the unknown, human beings lived in a world thick with invisible presence. Every shadow had weight. Every whisper of wind carried a message. Every creature that moved through the night was watched. Not with curiosity, but with reverence and fear. In biblical times, the world was not divided into the natural and the supernatural. To the ancient mind, everything was supernatural. The sun did not simply rise, God commanded it. Rain did not simply fall, heaven opened. Sickness did not simply come, something had caused it, something beyond flesh and blood. People in this era were surrounded by forces they could not see but absolutely believed in. Demons wandered dry places, seeking rest. Angels descended in blinding fire. Spirits attached themselves to locations, to objects, to bloodlines. A man could be tormented by something invisible. A city could fall because of what was happening in the unseen realm. Nothing was considered ordinary. A raven landing on a rooftop was an omen. A locust swarm was divine judgment. The behavior of animals was read like scripture, studied for meaning, interpreted with trembling hands. When an animal appeared in an unusual way, in an unusual place, ancient people did not shrug. They asked, "What is this telling us? What world is touching ours right now?" It was in this charged, watchful, spiritually electric world that every creature carried significance. The serpent was deception. The dove was peace. The lion was power. The lamb was sacrifice. Animals were not just animals. They were symbols walking through the earth, carrying messages from realms most people feared to name. And in this world, where everything meant something and nothing was ignored, one creature moved in the shadows with an unsettling silence. It slipped through the night without fear. It stared into darkness as though it could see what others could not. It sat perfectly still in the presence of the dying. It appeared without warning and vanished without explanation. People noticed. People always noticed. But strangely, unlike the serpent, unlike the raven, unlike the lion, this creature was almost never spoken of directly in sacred text. Almost as if the silence itself was intentional. Almost as if something about it was too dangerous to name. Could cats have carried a meaning people were afraid to speak about? To understand why cats carry such a deep, unsettling mystery in the ancient world, you must first walk through the gates of Egypt, the most powerful civilization the ancient world had ever seen. A kingdom built on the edge of the desert, watered by a single river, and governed not just by pharaohs, but by gods. Egypt was not simply a nation. It was a spiritual empire. Every wall was carved with symbols. Every ritual had cosmic meaning. Every creature that moved through Egyptian life was connected to a deity, a force, an invisible power that shaped the visible world. And standing at the very center of this sacred animal kingdom, sleek, silent, and unnervingly still, was the cat. Cats arrived in Egyptian civilization as hunters. They prowled granaries and riverbanks, killing the rats and serpents that threatened Egypt's food supply. To a nation that depended entirely on the Nile's harvest, a creature that protected grain was worth more than gold. The Egyptians recognized this quickly. They welcomed cats into their homes, fed them, treasured them. But something shifted. Something deeper took hold. What began as practical appreciation transformed into full spiritual devotion. Cats were elevated beyond usefulness. They were elevated beyond affection. They were elevated into divinity itself. The goddess Bastet, depicted with the head of a cat, became one of Egypt's most widely worshipped deities. She represented protection, fertility, and the warmth of the home. Temples were built in her honor. Priests served her daily. Thousands of cats were mummified and offered as sacred sacrifices, their preserved bodies discovered in enormous underground vaults that still send chills through modern archaeologists. To kill a cat in ancient Egypt, even accidentally, was punishable by death. That is not admiration, that is holy fear. But look closer at what Bastet truly represented, and the mystery deepens. She was not only a goddess of warmth and protection. In her older, more ancient form, before the softer image took hold, she was Sekhmet, the lioness, a goddess of war, plague, destruction, and the dangerous power of the sun, a force that could heal or devastate depending on her mood. The cat held both faces, gentle and lethal, protective and terrifying. Present in the home and connected to forces no living person could fully understand. Priests believed cats could perceive the spirit world directly, that their unblinking gaze saw through the veil separating the living from the dead, that their nighttime wandering was not aimless, but purposeful movement through realms invisible to human eyes. Egypt called them sacred. But sacred and dangerous have always walked side by side, because what happens when something seen as sacred is also feared? The Bible is one of the most detailed documents in all of human history. It describes the construction of an ark down to the exact cubit. It names the precise gemstones embedded in a priestly breastplate. It records the specific wood used to build sacred furniture. It catalogues family lineages across dozens of generations. It describes the color of curtains hanging in the tabernacle. It measures the weight of silver offered in worship. The Bible is a book that notices everything, which makes what it does not mention all the more striking. Open the scriptures and you will find animals everywhere. The serpent slithers through Eden in the very first chapters of Genesis. The raven and the dove carry messages of hope after the great flood. Lions roar through the Psalms as symbols of both danger and divine power. Eagles soar through the prophets as images of renewal and sovereignty. Oxen, sheep, goats, sparrows, horses, donkeys, bears, wolves, leopards, vipers, scorpions, all named, all given meaning, all woven into the sacred narrative with deliberate intention. Even insects made the list. Locusts brought divine judgment over Egypt. Bees produced honey in the Promised Land. Ants were held up as models of wisdom in the Book of Proverbs. The Bible noticed ants. But in all its thousands of verses, across 66 books, spanning thousands of years of recorded history, the domestic cat is nowhere to be found. Not in the laws of Moses, not in the Psalms, not in the Proverbs, not in the prophets, not in the Gospels, not in the letters of Paul, not in the book of Revelation, where strange and terrifying creatures emerge from seas and skies. Complete, deliberate, unbroken, silence. Now consider the geography. Israel sat directly between Egypt and the great empires of Mesopotamia. Trade routes connected these civilizations constantly. Cultural exchange was unavoidable. The Israelites spent 400 years living inside Egypt, the very civilization that worshipped cats as divine beings. They would have seen cat temples. They would have witnessed cat mummification. They would have walked past statues of Bastet in every major Egyptian city. They knew cats existed. They knew cats intimately. And yet, not one verse, not one reference, not one law about cats in a legal system that regulated nearly every other aspect of daily life. Other nations surrounding Israel mention cats in their literature, their mythology, their household records. But Israel's sacred text treated them as though they simply did not exist. That kind of silence takes effort. That kind of silence is chosen. The question is not whether the biblical writers knew about cats. The question is why, in a book that noticed everything from ants to eagles to the precise measurement of curtain hooks, they chose to say absolutely nothing. Was it simply unimportant, or something deliberately left out? Every ancient civilization that ever existed believed the same fundamental truth. The world you could see was not the only world that mattered. Behind the visible, breathing, touchable surface of daily life, something else moved. Something older. Something that did not sleep, did not rest, and did not belong to the realm of flesh and blood. And they believed, with absolute certainty, that certain animals existed on the boundary between both worlds. This was not superstition born from ignorance. These were careful, serious observations made by people who studied the natural world with intense attention. They watched animals the way modern scientists watch data, looking for patterns, anomalies, and meaning. And what they consistently noticed was that certain creatures behaved in ways that defied simple explanation. Birds flew in formations that predicted storms. Dogs howled at things no human eye could detect. Horses refused to cross certain ground without visible reason. These behaviors were documented, debated, and interpreted by priests, prophets, and scholars across dozens of ancient cultures. But no animal produced more unsettling observations than the cat. Consider what ancient people actually witnessed. A cat could move through complete darkness without a single stumble, navigating with a confidence that seemed impossible by natural means alone. Its eyes, those strange vertical pupils, expanded in the dark until they appeared almost entirely black, as though something behind them was opening wider, looking outward from a place no human could access. When light struck them at the right angle, those eyes glowed. Not reflected. Glowed, like something burning from within. Cats heard sounds at frequencies beyond human range, snapping their heads toward empty corners, tracking things invisible to every other creature in the room. They sat for hours in absolute stillness, staring at walls, staring at ceilings, staring at spaces where nothing visible, existed. Then they would suddenly flee in a panic from a completely empty room, or just as suddenly refuse to enter a space that appeared perfectly normal. They were drawn, consistently and unnervingly, to the dying. Ancient accounts from multiple cultures describe cats appearing unbidden at the bedsides of those near death, sitting in watchful silence as if waiting for something to be released. In ancient Mesopotamia, priests recorded beliefs that certain animals served as vessels, physical bodies temporarily occupied by spiritual entities moving through the earthly realm. Watchers, they were called, beings assigned to observe, to guard boundaries, or to escort souls from one existence to the next. Cats fit every description written about them. Silent enough to move undetected, perceptive enough to sense what humans could not, comfortable in darkness that terrified ordinary people, present at the moment of death with an almost professional composure that no ordinary animal should possess. Ancient cultures who feared spiritual contamination avoided them entirely. Others sought them out specifically, believing their presence offered protection against forces far darker than the cat itself. But protection implies the existence of something to be protected from. And that understanding alone sent cold fear through communities that took the spirit world seriously. Even those who valued cats admitted, in whispered records and careful writings, that there was something about them that did not sit comfortably alongside ordinary domestic life. Something that made people pause. Something that made even the bravest men glance twice at a cat sitting motionless in a darkened doorway. To most, it was simply the nature of a fascinating creature. But to some, this wasn't normal behavior. It was something unsettling. At this point in our journey through shadow and scripture, it would be easy to arrive at a single, dramatic conclusion. Easy to declare that cats were universally feared, spiritually condemned, and deliberately erased from sacred text because of some dark and hidden truth. It would make for a satisfying story. But the pursuit of truth demands something harder than a satisfying story. It demands honesty. And the honest truth is this: not every ancient belief about animals reflected spiritual reality. Not every cultural fear carried divine backing, and not every silence in Scripture means condemnation. Sometimes silence simply means that a subject did not serve the purpose of the text being written. The Bible was not written as an encyclopedia of the ancient world. It was not designed to catalogue every creature, every cultural practice, or every superstition circulating through neighboring civilizations. It was written with a specific, focused, and uncompromising purpose: to reveal the nature of God, the condition of humanity, and the path of redemption that connects them. Everything included served that purpose. Everything excluded simply did not. A cat hunting mice in an Israelite granary had no theological significance worth recording. And so it was not recorded. That is not conspiracy. That is editorial clarity. This distinction matters enormously when reading ancient texts responsibly. The surrounding cultures that feared cats, worshipped cats, or believed cats were vessels of spiritual entities, were operating from a framework built on mythology, anxiety, and the very human need to explain what could not be explained. When a cat stared at an empty wall, ancient Mesopotamian priests did not consider the possibility that the animal was simply reacting to a sound beyond human hearing. They reached immediately for supernatural explanation, because that was the only framework they possessed. Fear is a powerful architect. It builds elaborate structures of meaning over things that may require no such structure at all. Ancient peoples were not foolish. They were brilliant, observant, and deeply serious. But they interpreted the world through a lens shaped by their cultural inheritance, their religious systems, and their very understandable terror of forces they could not control. This is why separating biblical truth from cultural interpretation is not just important, it is essential. The Bible directly addresses the danger of reading spiritual significance into the created world beyond what God Himself has revealed. Israel was repeatedly warned against adopting the spiritual frameworks of surrounding nations. Not because those nations were entirely wrong about the existence of spiritual forces, but because their interpretations of those forces were dangerously distorted by mythology and fear. A cat was not evil because Egypt worshipped it. An animal does not carry spiritual contamination simply because a pagan culture assigned it divine status. The biblical worldview consistently locates spiritual authority not in creatures, not in objects, not in symbols, but in the sovereign God who created all things and holds all things in His hands. What we have explored across these chapters reveals something profound, not primarily about cats, but about people. About how desperately human beings search for meaning. About how quickly fear shapes interpretation. About how cultural anxiety can transform an ordinary creature into a symbol carrying the weight of the entire invisible world. The ancient Egyptians looked at a cat and saw a goddess. The ancient Mesopotamians looked at a cat and saw a spiritual watcher. Medieval Europeans would later look at a cat and see an instrument of darkness. And in every case, the cat remained exactly what it was: a creature, created, finite, and entirely subject to the same God who governs all living things. What changed was never the cat. What changed was the fear of the people looking at it. Sometimes, what people feared says more about them than the truth itself. We have traveled a remarkable distance together, from the torch-lit temples of ancient Egypt to the watchful silence of biblical Israel, from the terrified priests of Mesopotamia recording their observations of creatures that seem to see beyond the visible world, to the honest and necessary reminder that human fear has always been a powerful storyteller, often more powerful than truth itself. And yet, standing at the end of this journey, something remains. Not an answer, a feeling. That particular unsettled sensation that arrives when you have examined every available piece of evidence, turned every stone, read every ancient record, and still find yourself standing in front of a door that will not fully open. A question that refuses to resolve itself into something clean and comfortable and final. That feeling is not weakness. That feeling is wisdom recognizing its own limits. Consider everything we now know. Cats were present throughout the ancient world during the entire period covered by biblical history. They lived in Egypt while Israel lived in Egypt. They walked through the same marketplaces, the same cities, the same cultural landscape that shaped the world the Bible was written into. They were not obscure exotic creatures known only to distant civilizations. They were everywhere, and yet the Bible, which noticed everything, said nothing. Consider that the silence exists alongside a world that treated cats with a level of spiritual seriousness found with almost no other creature. Not casual superstition, not passing folk belief, but organized religious devotion, temple worship, sacred mummification, and priestly records describing cats as creatures uniquely positioned between the living world and whatever lies beyond it. Consider that the behaviors ancient people found so unsettling in cats, the darkness vision, the unblinking watch over empty spaces, the presence at the moment of death, the ability to sense what no human instrument could detect, remain genuinely unexplained at their deepest level even today. Science has provided mechanisms. Science has named the biological structures responsible. But mechanism is not the same as meaning. Explaining how something works does not always answer why it exists. Consider that across vastly different cultures, separated by geography, language, religion, and centuries of isolated development, human beings independently arrived at remarkably similar conclusions about cats. That kind of convergence does not prove those conclusions were correct. But it does suggest that something about the cat's nature consistently provoked the same response in the human spirit. A response caught somewhere between fascination and dread. Was that response rooted in spiritual discernment? In genuine perception of something real operating beyond the natural order? Or was it simply the universal human tendency to find pattern and meaning in the unfamiliar, to dress the unknown in the clothing of the supernatural because the alternative, accepting that some things simply cannot be known, is almost unbearable to the human mind? The biblical silence could be protective. A deliberate refusal to give spiritual weight to something that surrounding cultures had dangerously over-elevated. It could be editorial, a simple matter of relevance to a text with a specific and focused purpose. It could reflect something far more intentional, a careful boundary drawn around a subject too easily misunderstood, too quickly distorted by the fears and mythologies of a world that had not yet found its way to clarity. Or it could be something else entirely. something we have not yet thought to ask. The mystery of cats in the ancient spiritual world is ultimately not a mystery about cats. It is a mystery about perception itself, about the boundary between what is real and what is interpreted, about the line separating genuine spiritual truth from the elaborate architecture that human fear constructs over the unknown, about how thin that line has always been, and how few people in any era have been willing to stand on it honestly and look in both directions at once. Every generation inherits the unanswered questions of the one before it, and every generation adds new layers of interpretation, new cultural anxieties, new frameworks of meaning that say as much about the people constructing them as about the mystery they are trying to explain. We are no different. We stand in our own moment, with our own fears, our own inherited assumptions, our own desperate need to make the unknown knowable, and we look at the same silent, watchful ancient creature that stopped the priests of Egypt in their tracks, that went unspoken in the pages of the most detailed sacred text ever written, that crossed the boundary between the ordinary and the terrifying in the minds of people across thousands of years and dozens of civilizations. And we ask the same question they asked. So were cats ever truly connected to dark forces? Or is this a mystery created by human fear, culture, and the unknown? The truth might not be as simple as we think.